Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. Happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on how to be cyber smart stories from the trenches. We have some great panelists here with us today, and we're excited to get started. But first, just a couple of housekeeping items to take care of. We are recording the webinar today. We're going to provide a link to the recording and a link to the slide deck later this afternoon. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar. Don't hold back. We will wait until the end to address all the questions, but submit them as you go in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar panel. And if we don't get to everything, we'll be sure to reach out by email and get your questions answered. Just a small disclaimer about our content and then just some objectives today. You'll get to meet the panel. We have two panelists from Axos Bank and then one of our cybersecurity experts from Withum. We'll get a little bit of information about both of us, talk about cybercrime statistics, review some case studies, and then we'll leave it open for questions. And with that, Dorothy, I think we're ready to get started.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dorothy Kimura. I'm a Vice President, Senior Relationship Manager, and Team Lead here at Axos. I've been with the company for approximately a year, a little bit over, and I've been in the banking industry for about 15 years. Happy to be here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Carlos Ku, First Vice President, Treasury Management Team Lead here at Axos. I've been now here at 3 years and in the industry about 12 years amongst different verticals, everything from tech banking, commercial, healthcare, and escrow title, fiduciaries, what have you, and in different regions here in California from San Francisco down to San Diego. Happy to be here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Jackson. I'm with the advisory group for Withum. I'm a virtual chief information security officer, basically a strategic security planner for clients. I've been in cybersecurity for about 20 years, and I have a pretty long background with DoD, financials, and life and safety services, specifically focused on 911, provide security for all those groups. Totally unrelated, but I'm also a competitive lockpicker, which I like to throw out there to prove that I'm a hacker. And that's it for me. Back to Dorothy about Axos Bank.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So just a couple of things I wanted to share about Axos. So you can see here on this slide that we were founded in the year 2000, the height of the internet boom and kind of the dot-com era. Our claim to fame is that we were the first true internet bank. So that means fully digital, no branches, and we continue that model today. At that time when we were first founded, our name was actually Bank of Internet, or better known as BOFI. And then in 2018, our executive management team, recognized that the name Bank of Internet didn't exactly age well. It would be like being called Bank of Fax Machine or Bank of Facsimile, and so we decided to rebrand. At this point in time, Axos Bank is the largest bank headquartered in San Diego with a little over 1,000 employees. We are publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And as you can see over to the right, we were recently recognized as the cybersecurity champion by the Cybersecurity Alliance. Something else that I always like to share, especially when Carlos and I go out to meet with clients and prospects, is that we are the largest bank that no one has ever heard of. And we say that line often, and the reason why is because you might be familiar with the larger companies that are more or less client facing, but not realize that we, Axos Bank, are really the engine that kind of propels that company forward. And so an example of that would be Costco mortgages. So if you went to Costco several years ago and you applied for a mortgage and you thumb through all the disclosures at the bottom, you might find that it says powered by Axos Bank. So that's just one of several examples that we have with partnerships and kind of our footprint in the market. We have a few more of those, but we really find that we're more or less the bank kind of behind the scenes. Carlos, I don't know if there's anything you want to share, treasury management related or commercial banking related.
I couldn't have said any more beautiful about the bank. Thank you, Dorothy.
All right, perfect. So Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about Withum?
Sure thing. So Withum's cyber division is an IT security services and IT management services arm within Withum. It's an advisory group. We provide strategic and tactical services. We focus on incident response, e-discovery, which is forensics capabilities, as well as managing people's security programs, developing them holistically, which is my focus, and also doing assessments, authorized hacking, vulnerability testing, all that kind of stuff that security companies or that non-security companies need and may not want to develop those in-house. So with that, I'm gonna go right into cybercrime statistics because this is the bread and butter. Cybercrime is interesting, and I like to talk about it because people have a different mixes and thoughts on it, whether it's a guy in a hoodie hacking somewhere in the basement or it's an organized crime unit. And realistically, it needs to be thought of as a competing business. Businesses that exist have things that cyber criminals want. And those things that they want is basically to take your money in some capacity. So they want your money, you want to keep your money. It's competing business strategy. And it is a huge, huge business. It's $20 billion in ransomware alone since up until 2021 is what's projected to be. The damages related to cybercrime, business damages, reputational damages, as well as IT infrastructure itself, goes out as high as $6 trillion, which is a baffling number. There's the statistics on the slide. Every 11 seconds, there's a new cybercrime, as well as 57 times is the factor of how much ransomware has increased in damage and cost to companies. There's a recent company whose name I won't specifically name, but they're GPS oriented. And they lost services for about 2 weeks to a ransomware attack. And it's estimated in the industry, they have disclosed it, that they paid somewhere between $1 and $10 million to get their systems back. They had absolutely no choice. This is either they completely rebuilt their systems from the ground up, or they paid a ransom to a bunch of cyber criminals. So with that, let's go to a case study related to something that Axos focuses on a little bit.
Perfect. So, you know, we had interviewed a handful of bankers with, you know, a ton of experience to kind of come together and share our experiences just in the industry as a whole. And this case study is specific to business email compromise, otherwise known as BEC. In this situation, a fraudster hacked into an email server. They gained access to business emails and posed as the chief financial officer or CFO to direct the controller to wire funds into a different bank account. The imposter CFO also sent instructions to have the bank call his spouse's cell phone number to complete the wire callback. Eric, can you talk a little bit about kind of, you know, the BEC threat, the definition, and you know, how this could happen?
Absolutely. And your definition, the definition here on the slide is spot on. It's a busy email compromise, email account compromise within a business. It often relies on imposters more than clever hacking. Once that email has been taken over, they use it to do something. Specifically, it's your example here. I've worked a similar incident where a CEO sent an email to the CFO to say, hey, pay this company $500,000. And the CFO did, because it's the CEO saying send the check to this company for $500,000. Only after the fact had it been realized, and the incident response team found that the CEO's email had been compromised. And though he was in New Jersey, they were sending emails from Australia to the CFO to pay this company. And it turned out that that wasn't the case, and it was the hackers and the company themselves. And by the time they'd been discovered, the money was gone.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the better ways to actually just prevent and mitigate situations such as this one is to make sure that you partner with a financial institution that has verification protocols in place that verify via dual controls payment requests that come in outside of normal procedures. And outside of normal procedures, be it understood your good old-fashioned fax and your good old-fashioned paper and wet signature on the document. your financial institutions typically what they should be doing, and I say should because there's always those unpleasant surprises that happen every once in a while and you hear them on the news, should be verifying information with authorized signers, authorized representatives based on information that's available at the financial institution, meaning phone numbers and email addresses that are on file. As we can see in this example here, when there's a sense of urgency, all of us have it, but when there's a sense of urgency, the opposite end typically tries to accommodate, and sometimes, situations can happen where that accommodation leads to some sort of monetary loss. Now, what is the best way to move away from and to prevent and mitigate situations overall is to make sure that you partner up with a financial institution that can help you move away from a manual process, from paper processes, provide you with a robust online banking platform that can provide you with proactive payment alerts and also any sort of dual or triple layers of approval authority for payment execution. Having those layers of approvals can help save situations where the first payment, the first person in the chain may be compromised to some extent, but the second person or the third person in the approval chain can then go ahead and prevent the situation where we can lament afterwards and say, $1 million just went over to China. Let's see if we can get it back.
Mm-hmm.
Dorothy?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carlos. So this next slide here, we're calling it Axos in Action. It's titled Social Engineering. So in this situation, a fraudster poses as a familiar vendor to company A and sends a request to update the vendor's payment information using official-looking branded letterhead, fraudulent forms, and contact information. In this situation, company A's accounting manager reviews, updates, doesn't think twice, and approves the request. I think, this situation is probably very common where you're given, some directions to update information and you just go ahead and do that. So with that, Eric, can you talk us through kind of the definition there, and then, in what instances could this happen?
So there's social engineering is probably the most common gateway. Again, I mentioned, people picture hackers in hoodies in a basement, but most of the time it's really just people outsmarting other people, finding a way to do a thing that triggers people to do something they wouldn't normally do. Social engineering is a great example of that, and it does exploit people's emotions, information that the hacker shouldn't know, and therefore earns trust that way. Also of interest is that it does play against pride. There's a lot of what we call love scams in the field, but they work anywhere. It doesn't matter. Once somebody's committed to doing something because they believe it's the right thing to do, because the social engineering expert has made you do it, they don't want to admit it. We worked a love scam as an incident response not too long ago where somebody was tricked into giving away $1.1 million to a hacker over time, or a social engineer. I can't say a hacker. They just said, hey, here's my situation, I need some money, and we'll be together forever. And unfortunately, by the time that the victim had realized that they had been out that much money, it was gone. And worse yet, once they contacted us, one of their main focuses was they needed us to prove to them that it was a scam. Because in their mind, there was no way they gave away $1.1 million to a fraudster. They must have given it away for a good reason. So phishing, aside from everything else, it's something to remember that it hurts people's pride, and it's very valuable as a weapon because people don't want to admit they made giant mistakes.
Right.
And to add to that, some of the most interesting about social engineering here is that it's social engineering. What I've seen in the past happen is not an inconvenience. Social engineering tends to be a convenience, especially to the victim. How many cases have we heard of? As an example, I know of one. Lyft driver saying, hey, you're going to get a $500 bonus because of your 5-star rating. Give us a call to confirm your payment information. Next thing you know, they gave over card information and their social security. So but it was convenient. Hey, I'm going to get $500 for my 5-star rating. So, and when it comes to situations of social engineering, especially when requests to change payment information comes along, one of the better ways to do is to always have, a control point, and have a few other things that are more common sense. And your control point can be that one person in your office that's in your circle of trust that you can say, hey, do me a favor, give this vendor a call, give this company a call, confirm payment information for them. I just got a request to change, but I want to make sure it's the right one. Have that person in the circle of trust call, confirm. If it comes back the same information that you got, then most likely a legitimate request. If it doesn't, then it raises flags, obviously. And then the more common sense ones that we should be practicing and should not let ourselves go by emotion is always call back numbers that are trusted numbers, part of your historical communication. Call back emails. Email back using email addresses that you have as part of your history. And most importantly, don't engage in those fraudulent phone numbers or emails, because then all you're really letting the opposite end know is that, hey, they're paying attention to me, so let me just play along. Here's an example. If someone were trying to dupe me, or I was trying to dupe someone into changing payment information for me, all I simply have to do is just call them. If that person calls back, say, I don't trust this guy, calls back and says, trying to call back the same number that they have on their caller ID, I can just call my coworker off to my side and tell him, hey, here's the information for this person, this company. Just give them that same information, pretend it's a call center, and get it all the way through. It's that simple. And so we have to use trusted numbers, trusted communication methods that we have control points within our circle of trust, and not engage, which leads into a really good point that Eric's going to go through right now, is that every company and every individual is an IT company. And it's something that Eric's going to go through right now.
Indeed. And this feeds back into social engineering and a mix of social engineering and business email compromise, a lot of different factors. This is a case we worked a little while ago. It's a large corporation, medium size, I guess, by some standards. A financial services company, not a bank. The individual contributor who was a finance personnel inside the facility or inside the enterprise who handled finances internally for the company receives an email. That email contains an invoice for a service that they regularly use, and it looks normal. It has a PDF attached. They open the PDF crashes. The victim responds to the sender saying, hey, I got the PDF. It didn't work. Could you resend it? Nothing happens. Nobody responds. The company's IT department starts to notice that their bandwidth spikes considerably. The firewalls are logging a lot of traffic outbound, basically a lot of stuff leaving the enterprise. At some point, they step back, the IT people do, and it actually takes them about a day. And they step back to go, okay, this is really abnormal. We're experiencing what's probably a data dump of some variety. IT shuts down the internet for about 16 hours, which is all lost revenue. And they step back and really realize that they've probably experienced a large-scale attack. The group calls an outside incident response group, which happened to be Withum Cyber, and we stepped in to take a look at what was going on. Here's what happened, and it's interesting because not because of how scary this is, and it is scary, but of how common this is. We see this almost every single time. Almost every incident starts in a very innocuous way that seems fine and then blows up and goes out of control. So in this case, with the cyber team responded, we show up, we take a look around. The first thing we ran to was the PDF obviously contained malware, it contained a virus. It contained what we would call a Trojan, which was just a piece of software that allowed a hacker to gain access to their system. The victim really did respond to the hacker. And this kind of goes to what Carlos was saying about making sure you know who you're talking to. They thought that it was that person, but if they would have asked, they would have seen it. Had they looked at the sending email address closely, they would have seen it. It was spelled wrong. It had some very obvious telltale signs that it wasn't really who they thought it was. But they responded, which was really nice for the hacker because he knew exactly when she had run the executable and could then access their network. The hacker gained access to the network through that Trojan horse software and started to crawl around their network. They looked at all the computers nearby, they looked at all the data on the computers, and they started to look at the servers, and they started to export data, very simply, and what we would all call a breach. They started to breach data from the enterprise. All told, once we'd done the assessment, it looked like about 1 terabyte of data had gone out. And you'll see in the notes here, I said it's 40 million pages of text. And every time I see that number, I look at it and say, and that is statistically true. That's how bytes and bits work. But you say, well, is 40 million really real? And if you think back to legacy companies and rooms full of filing cabinets, and imagine that that costs money to store, but digital storage really doesn't cost any money, companies would and try to keep every single thing they have, and that's what was taken. And 40 million pages is probably fairly realistic. The contents of that data, excuse me, were PHI health information because it got in the HR systems. It was PCI information because it involved credit cards. It was a lot of privacy information, and of course, and the worst thing, trade secrets. There was a lot of stuff that pertained specifically to the business that was kept by the business that was taken and breached out on the wider internet. And this also includes, and something people always forget about, is legal documentation, the work of the lawyers, whether it's anything that has to do with a lawsuit, whether it just has to do with the establishment of the company, whatever it is, it was all gone and it was all taken. So what went wrong? And this is where really it's important that this is the focal point of this, because I'm going to try not to dip into deep technical here, but there's some things that are really simple that everyone should do. Carlos mentioned it, and it's key. There is no such thing as any enterprise, even an individual, that is not an IT business at this point. Even as an individual, if you have exactly no business interests, you have finances, and those finances are your business, and they are now on the internet. You are an IT company. I know plenty of people, my dad is one, who doesn't believe that he's a target. So he has really bad passwords, he doesn't run antivirus. And my dad is not, he's a retired guy from the military. He's got a fair amount of money, and I have to explain to him, and this is how parents are, explain it to him, and he says, oh, okay, and then he ignores me. But at the end of the day, my dad is a business, and you are a business, and I'm a business, and then there's a business itself. And if you manufacture toilet paper or you run an IT security company, you are an IT company, and you have assets. And those assets are targets for hackers. And we talked about the competing business model. Whatever you have, if a criminal can monetize it, they will. And ransomware has turned into, they can monetize anything you have because it interrupts your operations. So the typical model at this company that we talked to, they didn't believe they were a IT company. They were a finance company. They dealt in finance. And IT was a support function of what they did. And security was a support function for the support function that was IT. So they looked at it as a tertiary thing that they had to do. If they had compliance regulations to meet, they would do that, and otherwise do the bare minimum to say that they did. There were no security standards, there was no awareness. All users had administrative privileges. There's a thing that we always ask when we talk to new clients is, can you install software on your computer, your work computer? If the answer to that is yes, you have a weak security program. You should never be allowed to do that unless you are an IT person. And those IT people should install off of a catalog system. And it's a big part of security to say, I know what is installed everywhere. In the case of this exploit that we're talking about, this business case, that exploit only worked because that user had administrative privileges on their computer. And the hacker got them, they ran the software, and it executed as though it was the boss of the computer. And the computer doesn't care. It will execute anything it can. They had out-of-date software and legacy patching, or legacy systems and no patching programs. Anytime you hear of a large-scale scary breach on the internet, it comes from this. There's always operational considerations that are realistic that say, I can't take this system down because of how much revenue it generates, and therefore I can't patch it. But what has happened is that it's turned into a situation where it's going to cost you more to not patch it than to experience the short-term revenue loss to take that system down and fix it. Another company, who I won't actually mention who they are, very, very well-known credit history provider, somebody who does credit history, left out a vulnerability that was very well known in the security community. And when that vulnerability came out, it was a major problem for all security personnel across the world. and everybody rushed to fix it. Unfortunately, the fix caused damage in a lot of cases. And in this particular case, with that particular security group, who I personally know some of those members, they were told not to fix it. There was a certain basic ROI that had been calculated that said it's worth more to leave the system up than to take it down to fix it. This company, who, if you Google a bit with, credit history advisory services, and breach, you'll figure it out. They were wrong. They were incredibly, incredibly wrong, and it cost them untold millions of dollars and a very, very nasty stain on their reputation that will be around for a long, long time. There were no security controls in place, and everybody. Another question we ask is, what security controls do you have when we talk to a client? Always say antivirus. Everybody has antivirus. Antivirus is a security control. It is not the security control. And when we talk about large enterprise networks, especially, you need network security controls. You need a lot of very complicated security controls I won't go into, like things like DNS filtering and web filtering and IDS, IPS, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems. And all of those things should be something that even the CEO is aware of. Doesn't necessarily need to describe their function, but says, oh yes, we have IDSs, IPSs, we have network stuff, all to the good. We have done assessments on companies that do not have firewalls in place, which is basically the most rudimentary network control that exists. And in this case, it was pretty much that. They had a firewall and they had antivirus, and the antivirus was easily defeated by the malware and then completely made irrelevant by the malware. Finally, the network was flat, and this is another one that, if as a homework assignment, if anybody's not sure if their network's flat, ask your network guy, and he will tell you, because they're normally annoyed when it is, because it makes their lives harder too. But effectively, if a computer, like in this case, the finance person's computer, was sitting on the same network as all of the mission critical data that existed to this company, there was absolutely no separation between her workstation and the very important data and servers and operational functionality of the company. So when the hacker gained access to her computer, it gained access to everything at once. There was nothing to stop them from moving around, and it is the main reason. Actually, all of these are main reasons. It is one of the key reasons that this went really bad. It's one of the more common things we see, because older networks were generally grown flat, and if you've never taken the time to modernize your network, it just stays flat, and it stays this big sheet of glass that's really easy for hackers to maneuver and cause damage to. Finally, we talk about awareness. There was about 100 users in place in this company, and they all assumed that somebody was doing security. I gave a talk yesterday, actually, where I pointed out, and it's something to keep in mind, your IT people are not your security people. So if you assume that your IT people are doing security, you are probably wrong. They are, and it's not to say they're not capable of doing it, but they're generally going to be overworked and busy. And focusing on a full security program is a lot of work, and it causes a lot of issues. It's another one that we see very frequently with our clients is, no, I don't have a security program, but the IT guy takes care of it. And that's not actually what ends up happening, because most of the time when they call us, something bad has already happened. All right, and then where they are now. The company now learned their lesson. They kept us on, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, my function these days is mostly strategic. I help companies develop security programs. The company did not want to build an entire internal security shop, so they had us come in and find their problems and develop a security program for them. All those things that I just mentioned that were problems are the things that we aim to fix. Security is now a part of their process, and a vital thing that needs to be asked whenever we call it the good idea fairy. Whenever the good idea fairy shows up and says, I have a great idea, the next part is, how does this affect our security? And if somebody says, no, it's fine, that's not acceptable. They have to answer how it affects the security. It won't affect it is not true, because it's going to change something. So you need to know what it changes. There's a lot of processes and things to do in place that can help take care of that, but it all needs to be part of the beginning of the process. Security is an afterthought, which is another buzz term inside the security community, is a terrible, terrible way to practice security. It should be the first thing you think about and the last thing you think about, and it needs to be thought about on a regular cadence. They're largely compliant with frameworks. I always like to point this out because I mentioned they had PCI data, HIPAA data, as well as PII data, which falls in line with other standards. And they had no framework. Their security program was, we have AV and some firewalls. It turned out that that was not in any way functional. And the reason the frameworks exist is to protect your enterprise from hackers and also from action, from somebody deciding you weren't doing your job and protecting their data. There's a standard ISO 27001, which is an international standard, which pertains largely to privacy. And in the case of this breach that happened to them, they were liable, though safe from, for a lot of different reasons that have to do with lawyers, has nothing to do with me, but they were safe from action, but they were in breach of ISO 27001. If they had international customers, those customers could have held them liable for the data that was lost. Likewise, for the credit card information, they were violating several PCI standards. So one of the things that we did when we came in was look at all of the frameworks that applied to them and help them to develop a security program that answered those. So that if they were audited, we could say, here's how that was done. Here's what they've done to get to where they're in a good place with those different frameworks and security. Finally, and I will get to this on the next slide a lot, but the company has consultants regularly assess their network, and I'd love to say it's always us, but it's whomever does the job best for their needs. We do it at least once a year, but sometimes they have different requirements. So there will be more than one vendor doing their assessments, which is always good too. Effectively, we come in and we say, okay, where do you think you're secure? And they say, we're secure here. And we say, okay, let's go find out if that's true. Normally they're not. And that's not to say they're doing a bad job. It just means that we find new things all the time. And so we will show them where those problems are and help them fix them. Because like I said, a security program is the beginning and the end, and then a regular cadence thereafter. So we go through and we help them find these new security threats and vulnerabilities and risks and weaknesses and help them to take care of them as fast as possible. Finally, this is my scare you slide. This is the time is up. I like to say that I point out every single company is an IT company, and when we talk through how people handle their security, it's generally as an afterthought, and or moreover they say, well, I'm not really a target, and that's patently untrue, as we've talked about. You are targeted by hackers, and this is as an individual, as an enterprise, and everything in between. Hackers want to monetize what you have. When I talk about that, and I talk about the monetization of business, just some quick asides on how that works, because we didn't really go into specific threats. There was a time, everybody's aware of what Bitcoin is, at least I like to think so. Bitcoin is basically an esoteric, non-traceable currency. Bitcoin is really good for criminals to use. Not to say that only criminals use it, but due to being non-traceable, it's very popular among criminals. It was also mineable at one time, which meant that through mathematic calculation, you could generate more Bitcoin. It was so intensive that nobody who had a home computer could mine Bitcoin. They needed a server farm to do that. So the hackers went and started breaking into server farms. And that was one of the first things that happened. I'd say right around probably 2013 till even now, hackers would overtake entire data centers and just make them process Bitcoin or one of the other cryptocurrencies, of which there's many. And they would just do that, and they were silent, and nobody would ever see them unless a server basically exploded because it was being overworked generating Bitcoin. That was just the first example of hackers figuring out, I can make money off of your business, and that's what they tried to do. We had another example that I like to point out. There's a company that said, we are not an IT company. They were what we call a POTS company, plain old telephone systems. They dealt in just dial telephones. And that company did have a computer backend, and it had computers managing its traffic, but all of their crown jewels were ancient 70s, 80s technology that literally no modern people understood. They were hiring guys out of retirement to come work on this gear because it was so old and it did only what it was supposed to do. So I got called in on instant response to this system, and we show up and they said, hey, somebody broke in here and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of telephone minutes. And what this ended up doing, and what I thought was interesting is we didn't even understand what had happened because the system was so old and so complicated. We had to sit with them and they had to explain to us their business model. And telephones, and this is all news to me, each hop on a telephone call, it takes a fraction of the fee. And so what they were doing is they were creating a fraudulent hop, and then they would generate thousands of phone calls, and they would take a cut of the fraudulent phone calls fee from that fraudulent hop that they had created. So all they had to do was break into a telephone system and make it dial hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times going through that hop. So the bad guys broke into this network and then they left. And this is where it threw us off so bad because it was 3 months. We found the original intrusion and then nothing happened. It appears that the hackers went out and found probably one of those guys out of retirement to explain how that system worked. And then they came back in and they hacked the rest of the plain old telephone system that nobody understood and created this system. And as I said, it ended up being a $300,000 expenditure or a fraudulent loss to the company. They could never prove where it went. It was gone by the time it was caught and it was over. This is another where anybody who says I'm not an IT company, and it actually proved that to the point that I was shocked because I really thought, well, you guys are fine. That nobody's going to break into a copper telephone system. And they did, and they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Along those lines, along what we've talked about here, and Axos has reflected well that you have to have a security program. As we talk about Axos, they say, oh yes, those things, here's how you handle those things. Every threat I've mentioned, you need to have something. You need to understand in some way, how do I defend against that? And that answer may just be, well, our security department handles it and they're very good at it. And here's why. That's fine. But the response of, well, that probably won't happen to us, obviously, as we've discussed, is not a real thing. And more than that, there's becoming a greater and greater increase in corporate liability for these kinds of things. Your business getting hacked is going to be something that you need to recognize as your responsibility. You may get hacked, but if you have due diligence on your side, you can say, look, here's why this is okay. Here are the chain of events that led to this. Here's how we handled it. This is how we handled the incident. That's one thing. But if you just say, well, security is expensive, which is what we hear, you're probably going to be in some trouble now. And we're seeing that more and more as we go through the various incidents that we work. The one other one we have, just as a quick aside with the time is up aspect, a lot of companies have cyber insurance without a really strong security program. And they believe cyber insurance is going to be the answer to their security issue. Aside from the very obvious, you wear a seatbelt even though you have car insurance, right? There's a part to that says that insurance will not save your life, right? But even if you're going to go fully reactive, understand that cyber insurance companies are no different than anyone else, no different than any other insurance company. Say, were you wearing a seatbelt? Because if you weren't, we're not going to pay the full amount. And this is a problem we're right into. We're seeing more and more. We actually get brought in on both sides of the insurance conversation. Insurance companies will bring us in and say, hey, go assess them, see what their security looks like, and bring us back the results. And we can severely affect the payout, up to 75%. Conversely, we've had companies come in and say, no, look, we have Withum Cyber. This is the program we've implemented. It's a solid program. Judy in accounting clicked the link, and that's what happened. And we reacted completely. And we come in and say they've done everything they're supposed to do. Everything's okay. And they get paid out. But even then, not a great idea to rely on your insurance. Just something to always keep in mind. Cybersecurity programs from beginning to end and on a regular cadence are vital for any business to operate these days. One more aside, as we talk about personal responsibility, we talked about even you as a person is an IT business. Have your own idea of a security program. Sit here and think about your passwords. Are you using the same password on 10 websites? This is a really bad thing. One website gets knocked over, hacked. If it gets hacked, then all 10 of those websites, those hackers now have access to using your credentials. So little things to think about, and it's one Google away to say, how do I make sure I'm internet secure? It's something you need to think about. Also, in addition to this, assess your security posture. One of the if you ask a security professional, you say, if you ask any company, how's your security posture? A lot of them will say it's good. They're normally wrong, flat out, plain and simple. There are some that are very right and they have a lot of documentation, but I worked for a company when I was providing actual security at a tactical level, and we did a survey across the company, and 80% of the people thought we were intensely more secure than we actually were. We were working really, really hard to get to just the next level of security measured by capability maturity model. And they thought we were 2 or 3 levels higher than we actually were. Along those same lines, if you have to ask how your security program is, it's not good. As we talked through with Axos, and we mentioned a security thing, and they could say, oh, we have an example of that. This is how this works. This is good. If I go to a company and I say, hey, what do you do about phishing? They say, well, you know, we try not to click the link. We are in a bad place. This is not how security generally works. And the operative point here is that if you don't know, somebody else will know for you, generally hackers. So constant assessment. I said, you know, beginning, end, and on a regular cadence. You should have security professionals, either your own or a consulting service, come in and say, okay, this is what your security really actually looks like. Almost every single thing we do starts with an open source intelligence collection. Every client comes to us and says, hey, we want to talk about a security, some sort of security assessment with Withum Cyber. And so we go and we fire up an open source intel collection where we go through the dark web and known hacker sites, and we look for whatever is out there. And I believe, I didn't finish the statistics today, but it's over 90% of them have some sort of indicator of compromise out on the internet. Something that says, hey, yep, there is actually data out there. There's actually things that pertain directly to your company that hackers are manipulating in some way. Oh, finally, and this is the other side of this coin, because I am a strategic level security guy. Your tactical security people will look at you and say, yes, fix it, security, go, all the time. I don't care, break it. If we need to break it to make it secure, then we'll break it to make it secure. An old joke in security is, you know, the computer that's safe is one that's been turned off and disconnected from the network. Operationally, that doesn't work. We're all IT companies, which means we need the IT to make money. If we just shut off the IT from security perspective, it's not going to help the company in any way. So you need to triage your critical problems, and you need to set realistic and prioritized goals on what to fix first. Assessors help a lot with that. If you have an external third party come in and assess your network and say, okay, this is what it looks like, and here's how you need to fix it. And this one is the most important. This one is the least important. You know, this one has to do with compliance. This one has to do with a hacker kicking in your door and stealing all of your money. Those things are incredibly important, and it's something that a good security professional will do. So if you are in the realm of security assessment and security operations, and you feel like your ROI is not necessarily where it should be because they're telling you to do things that are bad for your environment, it's worth another look from a different assessment to say, okay, well, what are you doing? What is most important? And how do we fix it for you? Now, with that said, triaging, prioritization, don't wait. It's the most, as we're done here, if there's anything that any listener on this call does and says, well, I don't know what my security program looks like, go find out. Go find out immediately, because hackers aren't waiting. And if you're United States based, most of them operate overnight. They're global, and very few are operating directly in the United States because we have some really ugly laws. So they tend to operate from overseas. So literally, when you go to sleep tonight, remember, they're coming for your network at that time. And I hate to be a scaremonger, and I feel like it might. I do want it to be understood that as you wait, you're increasing your surface area, you're increasing your risk. And as we talk through all the things we've talked about today, all of these came from effectively procrastination. I've never talked to somebody who says security is not important. Even the ones who aren't IT companies, they don't talk about security is not important. They just say, well, I can't figure out how to fiscally, make that make sense, still do my job when I don't feel like I'm that big of a risk. So, next year we're going to take another look at it. That is a whole year. The last company I worked at experienced 1.4 million attacks per month. And we had a fully staffed security shop, and we were fairly large, but it didn't change the number of attacks. I've dealt with small companies with less than 100 employees that are still taking 1 million plus attacks. It all has to do with the exposure on the internet. So ultimately, I think I've kind of hit my points here. I want everybody.
I have a question. I think this is all very timely, especially now that, a lot of folks are working remotely, right? In the banking industry, every so often you'll hear somebody say there's a fraud season, which is not really true because it's year round, as you know. Would you say that these risks and these threats are kind of heightened because of, again, a lot of folks working remotely?
Absolutely. So COVID, and I gave a talk on this yesterday, COVID has changed the dynamic. It really accelerated a dynamic that was already happening, was work from home. There was always a prevalence of we're pushing everybody to work from home over time, over the last 20 years, I guess, 10, 15, 20 years. But COVID kicked that into high speed. And I mean, there are stories of, people literally just walking in, taking their desktop and going home with that gear. And that's where they're going to work because plagues, and it's scary. And it all, that was, you had the real balance of life versus work.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, all these things going home accelerated so fast that there was not a real ready plan across the whole of the world for how do we handle security in this perspective. And the hackers were super ready to go. A lot of people work now on their actual home PC, and they just remote in using Office 365 or one of those very convenient cloud-based programs.
Mm-hmm.
That means there immediately your home IT is now part of your work IT and vice versa.
Yep.
Which is the scariest part, is your enterprise's IT is now assuming the risk of every one of your employees' home IT. So I think I've driven home all my points, because if you're not scared yet, please ask me questions. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than game to answer.
Yes, let's see. Okay, so definitely scary stuff. There's a couple of questions, maybe this one, Dorothy and Carlos, you guys can address, I think. Are there any sign or signals I should be aware of that tells me that I could be a victim to cyber fraud?
Yeah, Carlos, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, primarily what we have to make sure is that we review as a business owner, we review our internal processes for the money movements that we're doing. And any outdated manual processes that are in place, those should be the first ones that we kick to the curb. We live in the 21st century, right? Yeah, 21st century. And I think if we're still dealing with paper and ink, then we're doing something wrong. There's still things that still revolve around that type of market. But if we're dealing about money movement, any manual processes need to be kicked to the curb. Identify any weak points or areas that require enhancements. And I think when talking about money movement, the biggest thing that any business owner can do is leverage available solutions that your financial institution can provide to you.
Mm-hmm.
Fraud, cyber fraud, hacking, malware, viruses, whatever you want to call it, can happen to anyone at any time.
Yep, I would agree with that. And just to follow that, I would say, again, in the banking industry, we often say if there's money leaving the bank, always have two folks, right? So you might have an initiator and an approver, but dual approval is so important. And a lot of us now, again, working remotely and so on and so forth, do everything by email. I would highly recommend that you pick up the phone. Call, your approver just to make sure, hey, I received this payment 10 minutes ago. You said you're running out the door, the sense of urgency, you tend to just do things kind of in a rush. take a step back, take a deep breath, make a quick phone call, just to confirm before you send out money outside of the bank. That would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you. Eric, the social engineering is a very interesting concept. Is there another example that you can provide of that?
I have lots and lots. It's, as I said, it's one of our more prevalent means of attack. I actually have two. One is very brief, but I think it's funny. I mentioned my dad. My grandma is British in '84 and still very much alive. And she one time received a call from me from a jail in Las Vegas and said, "Grandma, I need whatever, however much money for bail." And she thankfully called my dad and said, "Hey, Eric's in prison or in jail in Las Vegas. I need to bail him out. I don't know what to do." And my dad calls me, and I was in Nebraska. I was not in Las Vegas. I was not in jail. And he says, "What's going on?" I said, "I have no idea." So we both call my grandma and said, "Hey, it's cool. I'm in Nebraska. Everything's fine." I mentioned Pride earlier. That was about 10 years ago. My grandma is 84 now, refuses to believe that I was not actually in jail. She didn't pay, but she still believes to this day that I was in jail and that my dad and I colluded to hide that from her. And that's social engineering. And I think that part of Pride is always really important, because even my grandma, my very sweet British grandmother, gets very angry about that time I was in jail in Vegas, and I never was. The other one that pops to mind right away, and it's much more pertinent, was in the military. In the military, we used to do exercises where red teams and blue teams. So red teams were the bad guys, blue teams were the good guys, and we would basically have cyber fights. And the red team would cheat because they're hackers, and that's what they're allowed to do. The blue team was not allowed to cheat. We had to behave. We had to perform within military boundaries. The first thing they would always do would be to send evil things to all of the commanders inside of our command. I worked at US Stratcom, which is the nuclear command and control facility for the United States. Our high-ranking generals were freaking super high-ranking. They would receive these, and we were all universally always so scared of approaching them that they leveraged that to use those generals as attack vectors. They would infect malware onto the generals' computers, knowing that we were not going to go rip a general's computer out of the wall during an exercise, because it would be a really bad thing. And it's something to think about when any company exists, whether you are the C-level or you work for a C-level, and that C-level says, "I'm not changing my password. I don't want to memorize a long password." That's where everyone goes first. And that same power he has to say, "Hey, I'm not going to do that," is the exact same thing that a hacker will leverage. He will socially engineer that guy in particular, knowing that he is pretty much bulletproof, and that even security personnel are scared to really mess with the C-level in charge.
Wow. I think we have time for one more. Let's see. It's interesting. So it sounds like the AP or accounts payable person could be someone who could be a target. Do we have any recommendations or tips for that specific role when they are changing vendor, bank account info, et cetera?
Yeah, so I'll start this one, Eric, and then maybe I'll lob it over to you. I think, earlier, as Carlos stated, anytime you receive anything through email or even, fax, phone call, anything to make changes to your payment information, you always want to call back the number, call back the source and confirm. It could come in on official looking letterhead, or could come in the mail, or what have you. Always pick up the phone and always confirm. That's really your sort of your best, kind of frontline duty, if you will. It's really the first thing that you can do to protect yourself as well as your company. If you have, even further questions beyond that, I think many people on this line probably have a banker that's available, a relationship manager, a TMSO, somebody that they can reach out to ask some questions. So, feel free to do that and always reach out. Eric, I don't know if you have other kind of advice for specific roles in companies.
It kind of goes to what I was just saying, is once we develop the easy solutions. So I mentioned what the problems were with that one company A. Those are all kind of easy solutions. They have a flat network, they'd have security devices involved. Once you fix those problems, one of the next things you really need to do is look at your risk, look at where your areas of risk are. And we always like to highlight personnel. Your personnel, and I'm not saying all, well, personnel are actually one of the biggest risk factors, but specifically what they do. Your C-level should have tons of protection. Anybody who touches your bank account information should have tons of protection and monitoring in place. Not necessarily monitoring for them misbehaving, although you should. Also, just in the fact of, is everything happening there digitally making sense? Did all of a sudden 100 credit card numbers just fly out of somebody's email? You know, or scanned receipts, which we saw. We've seen this happen where all of a sudden a bunch of scanned receipts with a ton of valuable information that was valuable to that company shot off to a different company. So I always recommend wrapping a harder security level around your very important people who handle your HR data, your financial data, your product data.
Thank you. I think, let's see. This is a very specific question, so we'll throw it out there, and then I think that'll be it. Is there any way to confirm an ABA/routing number and also an individual bank account number to see what the account number, account name is? I don't know if that's something to touch base on later or if that's something you can address now.
So I'll go ahead and answer that one. So there's several different services out there, private companies that provide early warning type of services where you basically ping the debiting or receiving bank of a specific transaction and verify whether or not it's an active account, if what the information that you have matches with the owner on the account or accounts, and also whether it's an active, how long it's been open. It can get very detailed. Those are services that you can always sign up as part of a third-party service provider with any company. At the same time, especially if we're talking about electronic payments via the ACH network, one of the best practices that anybody can do there is do pre-notes. Pre-notes give a business the ability to do a soft ping to an account to verify whether or not it's an active account and whether or not there's any sort of issue with the account in the sense of, does it actually belong to the individual? When you send a pre-note, you're usually sending it directly to the account, and you're sending it with the name of the individual. And it takes a while. It's not like early warning, but it is something that's available to any sort of company that uses especially the ACH network. And when we're dealing with wires, doing early warning services through third parties is the best route to go.
All right, well, thank you. I think that's all we have time for, 3 minutes left. So thank you so much for all the information. Anything else you wanted to add?
No.
Great, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And as we mentioned, we will send out the recording and the slide deck this afternoon. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.